Okay, today is the 9th of Sivan in the year 5785. 9th of Sivan. We're on page Dalit Shin, which would be 304 in the book Mitzvot Hashem by Rabbi Yonasan Steif. We're going to start from the bottom of the left-hand column for those that have a copy and are looking inside. Tes Vav, which would be 15. Does that sound right? Okay. We're discussing over here the commandment of a person, is he or is he not required to give up his life under duress in order not to transgress. So for the Jewish people, there are the three so-called big sins where a person is obligated to give up their life and not transgress. And they are adultery, idolatry, and murder. Even if a person's life is at stake and is being threatened, the person is not permitted to transgress those and has to give up their life. That's the general rule. But for any other sin, under normal circumstances, so to say, a person is required to not give up their life. And we derive this from a verse that says, V'chai bohem, that they are to live in them. The Torah and the commandments were given to us to live. And based on that verse, we also know that if a person needs, they are to do whatever it takes if they're in a life-threatening situation. So again, for the Jew, that means that they would be not only permitted, but actually obligated to, quote unquote, desecrate the Shabbos. On Shabbos, there are many, many things the Jewish people cannot do because they have to observe and keep the Shabbos, the Sabbath. If, however, it's a life-threatening situation, they must break the Shabbos. Same thing when it comes to laws, dietary laws of kosher. There are many, many things which Jews are not allowed to consume. However, if one needs it to save his life, then he must consume the non-kosher food, and so on with any sin except for those three. Question is, what about a Noahide? After all, those three are three of the seven. So we made the argument that Noahide is not obligated to give up one's life, but rather they are to transgress if their life depends on it. So let's begin. Tes Vav 15, page Dalit Shin, bottom left. We may have done this last time, but a little review is good. Ayin b'Sefer Chemdas Yisrael. So he's telling us, take a look in a source, a book named Chemdas Yisrael. Tells exactly where it is in the parentheses, which page, which section there. Shechidesh, that over there, this Chemdas Yisrael, he innovates, shebazharas shvichus domim, that when it comes to the prohibition of shedding blood, of murder, Loi amrinon bivnei Noach, we do not say when it comes to the Noachides, the Yavor val Yeharig, that he should transgress and not allow himself to be killed. We don't say that. Why? Deha hatam be Yisrael. The reason why, when it comes to the Jewish people, shetzarch limser nafshoy, that he has to give up his very life, al shvichus damim, in order not to transgress and in order not to murder, he has to give up his own life. Humishum svaras, that is because of a particular logical explanation. And that is, as the Talmud says, my chazis. What did you see? Didama didach, that your blood, sumak tfei, is redder, more red. Dilma, perhaps, dama dechavrach, the blood of your friend, of your fellow Jew, sumak tfei is redder than yours. In other words, you don't know whose life is more precious. And it doesn't go by, there's no way for us to measure. It doesn't matter anything. It doesn't go by age, doesn't go by health, doesn't go by level of observance, doesn't go by religiosity. To keep it simple, we're talking about two Jews. Doesn't matter the gender, nothing matters. The rule is you don't know that your blood is any redder than his or her blood. That's the reason why a Jew is obligated to give up their life and not kill someone else. Usvara zoi, now this logic, shayach gam ben Noach, should, and indeed according to this opinion, applies as well to a Noahide. Okay, we're going to elaborate more about this later on when we actually get in the book itself. We're still, remember, in the introduction, in the generalizations, but when we're going to get to the mitzvah of not to murder, as we go piece by piece, mitzvah by mitzvah, commandment by commandment, we'll elaborate there. But he wants to say, this Chemdas Yisrael, that it also applies to a Noahide, that if someone is forced, that either, a Noahide, either you kill this Noahide or we kill you, the person is obligated to give up his life and not kill someone else. Not because of Kiddush Hashem, not because of sanctifying the name of Hashem, but simply because of this logic that how do you know that your blood is any redder than his? So what gives you a right to save your life at the cost of someone else's life? But much to discuss about that. We'll see. Next, we're on the top of page Shin Hey, which would be 305. Tes Zayin 16. Sefer Mizrachi, Parshas Shemois. So in a source, a book called the Mizrachi, on the Torah portion of Shemois, Genesis, chapter 4, verse 24. Chidesh, so he innovates, Sheben Noach, Sheloi Nemar Boy Apostle V'chai Bohem, that when it comes to a Noahide, which we do not have the verse, we do not apply the verse that says V'chai Bohem, that he shall live through them, that is specifically talking about the Jew, that verse in Vayikra and Leviticus 18:5. Therefore, since we don't have such a verse with regards to a Noahide, tzarich l'kayim mitzvos shaloi, he or she needs to keep their commandments, afilu b'makim sakana, even if it would endanger their life. Because we don't have a verse that says that you're supposed to live by the law and not die by it. V'rak, the only thing is, im ansuhu al ha'avera, if the person is literally coerced to sin at gunpoint, The person is not obligated, is not required to give up their life and not to transgress. But otherwise, to endanger one's health or life, the argument would be that they are required to do. Unlike the Jew, who is to commit whatever sin except for those three in order to preserve their life, the Noahide arguably does not have the right to transgress in order to save their life. But of course, if they are forced, then they are exempt, because anything that you do under coercion does not count as a sin. Let's see the brackets. Ve'al kain, and therefore, ne'enash Moshe Rabbeinu. If you recall, if not, let me remind you. Towards the beginning of Genesis, the beginning of the so-called career, if we may, of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses. So when Hashem appears to him at the burning bush and introduces himself to him and appoints him as the emissary, as the redeemer, to go back to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, and to redeem the Jewish nation. So he goes to fulfill Hashem's command right away. And he goes with his family. He takes his wife and one son and their newborn baby. And they're riding on a donkey. The problem is, the newborn baby was not yet circumcised. They travel and they stop off at an inn, at some lodging, and then Moshe's life is in danger. A form of a snake begins to swallow him up, and Moshe's wife, Tzipora, she realized that this is because they had not circumcised their newborn, so she did it. She circumcised the baby and saved her husband's life. That's basically the story as it's written in the Torah, in the written law, in the Bible. So now, why was Moshe punished? Al Masha Omar, for the fact that he said, Emoil ve'etze laderech, should I circumcise my son and then go traveling? Sakana hilayelad. That's dangerous for the infant. In other words, Moshe saw that he had several options here. One, circumcise my son, wait until he heals, at least 3 days, and then we can go on the journey to Egypt to save the Jewish people. By doing so, I would be delaying the commandment that Hashem gave me. He didn't tell me go in 3 days. He told me go. Another option, not to circumcise my son and to travel. He figured that's the best thing to do, because I have to obey and I have to go right now. And apparently leaving his family behind he thought was not an option. Surely not to leave the newborn baby alone. So he decided to go and not circumcise the child. Now, what's wrong with circumcising the child and traveling? Because that would endanger the life of the baby. Because it's right after this type of surgery, this procedure, and the child would be definitely considered someone who is ill right after the circumcision that day. So therefore, he didn't want to endanger the life of the child. So we're saying that was why he was punished. Degan b'mokim sakana, for even in a place of danger, tzarich l'kayim ha-mitzvah, one is obligated to fulfill the commandment. So it's very interesting because on the one hand, we're saying that since it's before that, we're implying that since it's before the giving of the Torah, everyone had a status of a Noahide. So Moses was not yet Jewish. Nobody's yet Jewish in the legal term. Everyone is B'nai Noach, Noachides. And yet, we know from Midrashim that our forefathers, at least, they kept all of the commandments. Hence, Moshe wanted to circumcise his child, especially since Hashem told Abraham to circumcise himself and all of his male children, etc. So we are descendants of Abraham. Moses is a descendant of Abraham. His son is a descendant of Abraham. So of course, we circumcise. And yet, because he's a Noahide, he didn't have the luxury of, so to say, a Jew who should not do a commandment, should not perform a commandment and endanger someone. He was supposed to circumcise the child and endanger the child's life. However, the Sefer Chemdas Yisrael, in this book that we quoted in the previous paragraph, he explains at great length to prove that Maimonides, the Rambam, does not hold like that. He does not agree that one Noahide is to endanger his life to keep the commandments. Valkain Kosav, and therefore he writes, Shebnei Noach, Sheben Noach, Eina Mitzuva L'Kayim Mitzvah is B'Mokem Sakana. That a Noahide is not required to fulfill his commandments in a situation of danger. So if one is in danger, just like the Jew, do not fulfill the commandment if that will endanger the person's life. Because that verse that we quoted from Leviticus, v'chai bohem, that he shall live in them. And we said that verse is speaking exclusively for the Jew. Well, he's saying, guess what? It's also, within the context of that verse, for the Ger Toishav as well, the resident alien, who is not Jewish, and yet v'chai bohem. So he wants to say that since it applies to Ger Toishav, therefore it would apply to anyone who is keeping the 7 Noahide commandments, v'chai bohem, that the commandments are to live by and not to die by or endanger one's life. V'chein, and along the same lines, likewise, mutar lohem lisrapes b'isurim shloi b'mokim sakana. Noachides would be permitted to heal themselves from sickness or illness with various prohibitions, even if their life is not in danger. In other words, let's say medication, and let's say the medicine is only by transgressing, whatever it may be. Let's say the person has to eat a limb off of a live animal in order to heal them. They would be allowed to, even if they're not really in danger or their life isn't in danger, because it is v'chai bohem. You're supposed to live by it, and live by it means to be healthy. Valdvar kushias hamizrachi, and with regards to the question of the Mizrachi that we're talking about, Tzion l'shita mekubetzes nedarim. So he mentions to look up in one of the early commentaries on Tractate Nedarim, Shehiksha Kushya Zoi, that he actually asks the same question that the Mizrachi asks, Umitartza, and he gives her an answer. Umashman, the implication is, Tisvir Olei, that he holds Gamkein, also, the Beben Noach Lo Yinemar HaPasuk V'chai Bohem V'ayin Shom, that he also agrees that this verse is not speaking about a Ben Noach. The verse that said you're to live by it is not talking about a Ben Noach, according to the Shita Mekubetzes, just like according to the Mizrachi. So what is, in fact, this question? So as they bring down to the bottom, they fill it in. Footnote Yud Gimel, which would be 13. He asks the following question. What was Moses' problem over here? What was his dilemma? He said, can I circumcise my son and then go traveling? That's dangerous. The Torah wasn't given yet. So therefore the verse V'chai bohem wasn't yet given. That verse that says that you're to live by it didn't apply yet. So why did he think that it's a problem to circumcise his son and put him in a life-threatening situation? So that goes along with the Mizrahi, not with the Rambam. But according to the answer of both the Mizrahi and the Shitu Mekubetzes, remember he said both of them asked the same question. So according to what they answer very simply that it's logical. You don't need a verse. After the giving of the Torah, yes, we have this verse, and then we have the whole discussion, and does it apply to Noahides or no? Does it apply only to Jews? Does it apply to Jews and Ger Toshav exclusively? Or all that whole discussion of how to interpret and understand and apply the verse. But even before you have that verse, it's logic. And no one argues that Hashem wants you to live by his laws. And therefore, if in order to avoid danger, you need to transgress, it makes sense to transgress. It's only that when it comes to those three big ones, so then we're taught, or we have a different logic, as we said, about who says your blood is redder than his. But otherwise, any other sin, the assumption would be that you are to transgress in order to save yourself or save a person's life. Then he says, Ulekule alma, according to everyone, all opinions, ben noyach einoi mitzuve ala mitzvahs b'makom sakana. A Noahide is not commanded to keep commandments even in a time, in a place, a situation of danger. All right. Back to the text itself. The last two words on the last three lines in this section, this paragraph. V'li nireh, so Rabbi Steif says, to me it appears, pashut, very simple, shesakonas havlad shani. The danger of the child, of the infant, is different than anything else. Shabein eine mitzuvah adayin. The child is not yet commanded to keep the Noahide commandments. So even if you want to make the argument that one is to endanger their life and not transgress, and the verse V'chai bohem only applies to Jews, and we don't go according to the logic that, of course, you're supposed to live at all costs. But if you don't have a verse, we don't apply that logic, and therefore a Noahide is supposed to keep his commandments, even if it means endangering his very life. That may be true, arguably, but you surely can't endanger the infant's life, because he's not commanded yet. You have to wait until he becomes an adult, and then, according to this approach, he is to keep all the commandments and not transgress, even if it means endangering his very life. But you can't do it to a child, because he's not commanded yet. And that's why Moses said, what should I do? Circumcise the child and then go traveling? That would be dangerous for the child. He didn't just say it would be dangerous. He emphasized that would be danger for the infant. But then, of course, then comes back the question, so why was he punished? All right. Next, Yud Zayin, 17. La'olam, always, forever. Ein oinshin, mehen. We do not punish Noahides for transgressing. Loi katan, not a minor, if he or she is under the age of responsible adulthood, whatever that age may be. Again, for Jews, it's very clear. 13 for the boy, 12 for the girl. Under that age, they're called a katan, which means a minor. So a Noahide that's a minor, whatever that age is, they don't get punished. For loy cheresh, or someone who is deaf mute, they also don't get punished. For loy shoite, or someone who is an imbecile, someone who is in a certain degree mentally deranged, or probably the correct term would be insane, legally insane, which obviously has to be determined, etc., to what extent that is. So in Jewish law, again, it's very clear. Those three categories, they always go together. We bunch them together countless times throughout the Talmud and in rabbinic literature. The deaf mute, the insane, and the minor. They are all exempt from everything, and therefore any prohibition, any transgression that they do, they're not held accountable for, and they're not punished. So we say the same thing applies to a non-Jew, to the Noahide. Lefi she'einon b'nei mitzvos, because they are not in the category of being commanded. Hashem does not demand more than we can do. So if for whatever reason Hashem created an individual with these handicaps or these disabilities to this extent, he does not hold them responsible, and therefore they're not commanded. That's the Rambam, Maimonides, in chapter 10 of the Laws of Kings. But however, what still needs to be discussed, until when, till what age is a Noahide called a minor? It is not so clear. Okay, we're going to discuss it, but it's not as clear-cut as it is for the Jews. Umi pashtus lashon harambam mashma, and from the simple reading of the Rambam, it's implied, what's understood, shekatan, that a minor, hainu she'enoi ben yud gimel shanim v'yom echad, meaning to say, it is a child that a boy that has not reached what we would call his 13th birthday, shehevi shtei sayros, that has at least two pubic hairs. In other words, he has to have both the age and specific hairs. Now, so he wants to say that it seems like the Rambam would agree that it's the same criteria for the Noahides. Shekol kamash lo igia lo einazoi, for as long as the individual did not reach this stage of maturity, adain hu katan, he is still a minor. V'hainu bezachar, that applies to the male. Havel bin akeva, but the female, shir gadlusa, the measuring age of her maturity, of her becoming an adult, it's from when she reaches age, what we call the 12th birthday, and she has those two pubic hairs. Kimevur benida, as explained in the tractate of Nida in the Talmud. Uber Rambam, and as explained elsewhere in the Rambam. Again, those places that he's referencing, the Talmud and the Rambam, are not speaking about Jews. They're speaking clearly about I'm sorry, they're not speaking about the non-Jews, the Noahides. Clearly, they're speaking about the Jew, but we're implying from the Rambam's language here, where he speaks about the laws of Noahides, the 7 commandments, that would be the way to measure for the non-Jews as well. In the brackets, Uve Sefer Chemdas Yisrael, and again quoting the same book, Hevi me Chacham Echad. He brings down from a particular wise man, Shechidesh, that innovated, Shebivnei Noach ein chiluk bein zochar l'nekeva. So this individual wants to say there is no difference by Noachites for the age of adulthood for male and female. That's only a Jewish thing. V'gam l'nekeva einoi nasa gedola ad yud gimel shana v'yom echad. And for whatever reason, a female, according to this opinion, only becomes an adult from age 13, just like the male. And he brings a source that also in a much earlier, what we mentioned before, the Shita Mekubetzes, which is an earlier commentator on the Talmud, over there too, he wants to say that it's understood from there the same thing, that for non-Jews, the age of maturity of the woman, of the female, would also be age 13 as opposed to 12. So it's strictly for Jews that women become adults at age 12. That's one opinion. I know it's getting late. We need to switch now to the phone, and we're going to have to open up soon.
Recording in progress.
That's not me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Give me a moment here. Be right with you. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, I want to do the next paragraph before we open up for questions or discussions. No.
Rabbi,
Yes.
you're sideways.
No, my camera.
Right. Okay. Thank
Is
you.
that better?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay. So let's do the next paragraph. We're on page Shin Hey in the left-hand column, which would be page 305. However, Ho'achroinim, the later commentators, pikpiku bazeh, they are very doubtful about this, that we're saying the age for non-Jewish women to be adults is also 13. Visvirale, and they hold these various different later commentators. That since this time frame, this age of 13 for the male, Yud Beis v'Nekeva, and 12 for the female, Hu Bichlal Shiurim is included in those, so to say, measurements, Shein Halacha L'Moshe Misinai, which go back to the oral tradition of Moses from Sinai. Now that's a whole discussion, and in Torah law, for those of you that are somewhat familiar, up close that is, with Jewish law, it's incredible and remarkable as to how so many of the details of the laws, of the rituals, are so not just detail-oriented, but measurement-oriented. Whether it's weight, whether it's size, whether it's age. I mean, out of the 613, you can go through one after the other, how we are so exact, so precise. Oftentimes there's a minimum and a maximum, whether it's in time, whether it's in weight or size. Oftentimes there's a minimum, not a maximum, but so many, many, many details. So there's measurements. And just to mention but a few. Kizayis, Kibeya, Tefach, Amma, and many, many, many more. I'm not going to even bother translating those right now. So all of those, whatever the commandment is, whether it's consumption of food or whether it's the size of the booth of the sukkah, all of those measurements were told orally to Moses at Sinai. That's part of the tradition. It's not written in the written law, but it's called halacha l'Moshe miSinai, law given to Moses from Sinai. Now that goes about all the measurements, including the age of adulthood. You see, if a boy, a male, has the physical maturity signs, he has the pubic hairs, but he's not yet 13, he's still a minor. And we don't consider those hairs to really be what they appear to be. If he is 13 and he doesn't have those yet, then he's still a minor, biblically speaking. And only once he's 13 and has those is he considered an adult. And the same thing applies to a girl at age 12. So who decided to 13? Who decided 12? So that is part of this tradition that goes back, Moses receiving it from Hashem at Sinai. So he tells us a commentary to look at. Shekasav Kain b'shem Tshuvos Harosh, who wrote this in the name of the commentary, the Rosh, which stands for Rabbeinu Asher, which he was the end of the era of what we call the Rishonim, of the early codifiers. The Im Kain, and that being so, if so, Lefima Shekasav Rambam, according to what the Rambam writes in the Laws of Kings, the Rambam writes clearly that all of these measurements were given exclusively for the Jewish people. So Noahides don't have these measurements. So for example, if there is food which a Noahide cannot eat because it is Eiver Minachai, it is a piece of meat that was detached from the animal while the animal was still alive. How much, what is the amount, what's the quantity that the Noahide would be liable for eating? There is no amount. The smallest, most minute fraction. However, for a Jew, if a Jew were to eat non-kosher meat, there is a minimum requirement, even though he's not allowed to eat even less than that, but the punishment he would not receive if he ate less than a certain amount. So if Noahides don't have any of these measurements, as the Rambam states, Im Kain, if so, Yesh Loimar, we would say, Shebivnei Noach, that when it comes to Noahides, Loital Yashir Gadlus Bishanim Ubesairos. The age of adulthood is not dependent on age, on years, and these hairs. You don't go by that. So what do you go by? You can't just randomly say, all right, 18, no, 21. No. So what age? So he wants to suggest as follows, according to many of these later commentaries. Ella, rather, hakoil talia, everything is dependent. Imu ben das, is he what we call ben das, which means intellectually mature in a responsible sense where he can relate to something. It doesn't go by his IQ. It goes by intellectual maturity. Shesichloi shalem, that his mind is complete, his intelligence is complete. Demasberile umasber, that you explain something to him and he gets it. Shaz chashuv kegadol, then he's considered to be an adult, which perhaps, arguably, makes it very difficult to pinpoint. What it definitely is saying is everybody is judged individually. So you can have a group of 100 people and they all have a different age. It doesn't go by their birthday. Now he tells us to look up in the Chasam Sefer, Yeredeya Ubemin Chas Chinuch, two other references. V'raisi, and I saw, says Rabbi Steif, Muatak b'Sefer Shar Levi b'Shem Sefer Shilas v'Tshuvas Beis Shloimoi Oirachayim. He says, I saw brought down in a particular book, quoting another book, Shekasav, that what does he say? He writes, D'le'inyan kinyonim v'arayos, that when it comes to two topics, acquiring property, acquisition, and marital relations and status, or the prohibition of promiscuity. So in those two areas, we do require the Noahide to be 13 years old. But then there is at least one commentary of the early commentaries on the Talmud, known as the Tosfos, where Tosfos holds that these measurements that we just said are exclusively for the Jewish people. That Tosfos says no. Unlike the Rambam, this Tosfos is disagreeing with the Rambam, that the measurements are also for Noahides. Which according to that would mean that in order for a Noahide, for example, to transgress when eating meat that came off of a living creature, he would have to eat the same required minimal amount that a Jew does. And he brings down two other sources that say the same. However, this one that he just quoted beforehand, who said that as far as those two areas of acquisition and marital status, that's where you say that the measurements are. So he says that what the earlier sources that say that there are measurements is not a good proof. So bottom line is, it is controversial as to whether there are measurements for the commandments of the Noahides, and therefore, the topic we're discussing, is there a very specific age or not? So there are opinions in both directions. It is controversial. Some say, yes, 12 for the girl, 13 for the boy, just like by the Jews. And others say, no, every individual needs to be judged independently, which could mean that even younger than 12 and 13, they can also be considered responsible adults that are held liable for transgressing. And they could be much older than 12 and 13. So we have these two opinions. All right, let's open up now for questions, comments, or what have you, please.
Rabbi, I posted a question. Say in the concentration camps, the Germans would say they will kill 10 people if someone escapes. And what if you have an opportunity to escape? Should you really consider that option rather than save your life?
Wait, if someone escapes, then they would kill everyone?
No, they would, yeah, they would, after they do, they would kill 10 people if one escapes. So it becomes a reminder to those inside the camp not to try to escape.
Wait, but if no one would escape, they would let them live?
That's the thing. Some would be worked to death. Some would be, yeah. So, yeah, my question is, how should you behave? So, for example, you really have an opportunity to escape. Should you really, I mean,
You're
So
saying
do
by
you
you
really get?
escaping, but one escaping, he's endangering the other people.
Yes. I mean,
Okay,
after they found out that someone escaped, they would kill in the morning 10 people for everyone who escapes.
so the classical case, the way that it's brought down in Maimonides as well, is if they demand from the group of Jewish people to give over one of the Jewish people, let's say to be killed, and they say that then they'll let all the rest live. And if you don't give us that Jew, we will kill everybody. So the halacha, the law is as follows. If that one particular individual that they are asking for, or if there is an individual that, for whatever reason, has transgressed and is liable to be put to death, only then may you give that person up, because that person anyway is quote unquote supposed to be put to death. Short of that, if that's not the case, then the law is you're not allowed to hand over any Jew, even though that will save everybody. You cannot hand over any Jew, and even though that means that all the rest will perish, will all be murdered. That's the law. But you're asking something a little bit different, I think. Can one escape knowing that because of that, the others will be put to death?
Yes.
It's a big problem. It's a very difficult question. It depends. What are are there chances that they won't be put to death? Or because the assumption is that in that case, they will definitely know that someone escaped.
Yeah, when they do the head count. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And actually, I don't know. It could really get complicated. So for example, this was in the Sobibor film. There was those who escaped, but they were captured back by the Germans, and as a punishment, they will be killed. But they have to choose someone from the camp, someone from the lineup, a person, a partner to be killed too. So those people did not escape, so they have to choose among those who did not escape, someone to be a partner to be killed also.
That's not
So
allowed. Yeah, that they're not allowed to do. Even by not choosing someone, they're going to kill everybody. You still
mhm.
wouldn't be allowed to choose one person, even though logically, whoever you choose is going to get killed in any case. You're just saving everybody else. But you can't be the one to pick one person.
So you just remain passive for that instance.
Even though that means that everyone else
Mhm.
will get killed. Yeah,
How
very
about there's an opportunity to escape, and then you think, oh, they might kill 10 people tomorrow. So what's the for that?
right. So in that situation there is strong grounds to say they're killing everybody anyway. On the contrary, anybody who survived, they're the exception. So I don't know. It's very, very serious. I don't know.
Mhm. Yes.
Anyone else? Should we continue? We have a few more minutes. Okay,
Sure, Rabbi. Thanks.
sure. Okay, we're going to do the next piece. The bottom of this page, for those that have the book, are looking inside. Chai, 18. Venirali, it appears to me, says Rabbi Steif, Disuma ben Noyach, a blind ben Noyach. We spoke about someone who was deaf mute or insane. What about someone who is blind? They cannot see, but they can hear, they can speak. Chayav b'sheva mitzvahs tidhu. He says, it appears to me that they are obligated to keep the commandments, the 7 Noahide commandments. Afilu l'Rabbi Yehuda, even according to the Talmudic sage Rabbi Yehuda, the Sfira lay that his opinion is, again, when it comes to Jews, he's talking about Jewish people. When it comes to Jews, Rabbi Yehuda says, Disuma patur mikol mitzvahs, that a blind person is exempt from all commandments. Just like the deaf mute and the insane or the minor. So even according to him, he wants to suggest, he would agree that a Noahide is different. Mikol makoim, next page. Nonetheless, the dafka be Yisrael. This, that a blind person is exempt from all the commandments, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is only when it comes to the Yisrael, the Jewish people. Mitam, for the reason, Shegila hakasuv liftar asuma, because we have a verse, and that verse reveals to us that a blind person is exempt. And that verse is again clearly referring to the Jew. Kididarshinan sham mikama mikrois, as is derived in the Talmud from a number of verses. It's not clear, but from the verses put together, a number of verses, we derive that a blind person is exempt, according to this opinion. But when it comes to a Noahide, loikilakra, there's no such verse that applies to a Noahide, so it wasn't revealed that a blind Noahide is exempt. The gam sumachayev, and therefore also a blind person is obligated. V'ayin b'minchas chinuch, and take a look in the minchas chinuch shechidesh, that he innovates. Shegam l'Rabbi Yehuda, that also according to Rabbi Yehuda, shesavira lay, that holds the Yisrael suma pater, that a Jew that's blind is exempt. Mikol mitzvahs, from all commandments. Mikol malkim, nonetheless, chayav b'sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach. Yet he is obligated in the 7 Noahide commandments. Interesting. He says that a Jew that's blind, he's exempt from all the commandments. But the 7 Noahide commandments, that Jew still has to keep. Why? Sheyesh loymar, for we can say shaloi niskadesh asuma bar Sinai, because that blind Jew did not become sanctified as a Jew, which is obligated in all the 613 at Mount Sinai. Why not? Why would a blind Jew, is he any less Jewish? He says yes. Why? Kevan shaloi hayu sham sumin, because there was no one blind at the receiving of the Torah. All the sick people became healed. One of the miracles at the revelation at Sinai was that all the Jews there, whatever sickness they had, they were healed. So there were no blind people there. As is explained in the story part of the giving of the Torah. In the homiletic part about giving of the Torah. Tichsiv, because the verse says, the whole ha'am, and the entire nation, all the people, royim esakoilis, saw the voices. Everyone saw. Means nobody is blind. Valkain, and therefore summa patur. That's why a blind person is exempt, because there were no blind people receiving the Torah. V'zeh davka b'yeser ha'mitzvos she'Yisrael and Solomon. But that only applies to all the rest of the commandments that were given to Jews. But a mitzvah that a Noahide is obligated to keep, so also a blind Jew would be obligated. He's no worse than a Noahide. So a blind Noahide has to keep it, but a blind Jew doesn't? No. A blind Jew need not keep all of the other 613. But these 7, he has to keep just like a Noahide and just like a blind Noahide. Ayin Sham. Take a look there. So from it proves there, at any rate, even if you don't want to accept this tremendous novel idea that a blind Jew has to keep the 7 Noahide commandments, but surely a blind Noahide has to keep his 7 commandments, even if you say that a blind Jew need not keep the 613. But at any rate, we say that a blind Jew is obligated. So that's really, this whole discussion was pretty much only academic or theoretical, because really we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda, and the only ones that are exempt are the deaf mute and the insane and the minor. And that brings us up to Utes in the middle of page Shinvav 306. Okay, so hopefully, with Hashem's help, we are on for next week. In the meantime, I want to wish everybody all the best, success in learning and teaching, promoting, and most important, observing and keeping all of the Sefer Mitzvot Bnei Noach and all of their branches, and making this world a godly world, revealing Hashem in this world with the coming and the revelation of Mashiach.